A thought occurred to me just before we start, which I think is relevant to this evening, because regardless of the specific issues of houses of worship, which obviously concerns, well, it certainly concerns me, it's what I do for a living, but particularly others as well. There is a thought occurred to me that, we say in Tehillim, the Pasuk says, Lahagid baboker chastecha ve'emunoscha baleilos. I'm sure someone else has asked this before me, but the order, you would expect in theory for it to be reversed, because normally, evening then morning, right? So you would have, the sense of emunah at night, and then in the morning, is lahagid baboker chastecha, right? There must be a way of phrasing it. Why is it phrased in that way? Lahagid baboker chastecha. Why do you start off with telling the kindness of Hashem in the morning? Maybe it could be, and this is just off the top of my head a thought. It could be that the reason is because one of the ways of having and developing that emunah at night symbolizing any time of darkness, of struggle, of challenge, is to remain focused on that lahagid baboker chastecha, and it needs to be a relentless focus. It's an incredibly difficult thing to achieve, because you're always, at a time of difficulty, it's one of the hardest things is being able to see, right? To see the end of the tunnel, to see the light, and you could hear that in the Prime Minister's address, right? It's very difficult to keep telling people it's going to be okay, it's going to be okay, it's going to be okay, when they're saying, the further along the more times you have to say it, the harder it is for people to sort of still go along with you. And maybe when David HaMelech says that in Tehillim, the idea is that by speaking out the kindnesses of Hashem, lahagid baboker chastecha, deliberately at a time, even before you even think of the fact that it's night, maybe that is a way of coping with those difficulties, and that's why that posuk is in that order. Just a little thought in line of this evening. But we move to the Mishnah. So the Mishnah is on Daf Hey Amud Aleph. Kosel Chotzer Shenofel. You have a wall of a courtyard that collapses, that falls down. By the way, can you all hear me clearly? I've invested in a microphone, a separate microphone. You see, you can't really see it. Anyway, yep. So hopefully it should be clearer than previous times. The a wall of a courtyard that falls down. So you can obligate him to build it up to 4 amos, the height of 4 amos. And the 4 amos height we've mentioned before. Is the height that's necessary for Hezek Re'iyah, in order not to cause damage through people looking into other people's property. That's something we've mentioned, that specific height we've mentioned before. Here we're dealing with a scenario where they have this wall between them. The wall collapses, and because it's collapsed, one of them each can obligate the other one. We got to pay half 50-50. There's an expectation on both of us to share in order to ensure that we don't cause that damage to each other, which was the conclusion of the Gemara before. So even though we started off the Masechta with a debate, a discussion whether Hezek Re'iyah Shmei Hezek or not, whether it's considered Hezek, our conclusion was Shmei Hezek, it's considered Hezek, right? It's considered to be an actionable cause of damage or head of damages, which is why you'll see, for example, Rashi just goes straight into here in the Mishnah, Hezek Re'iyah, right? Because we've established that already. We've established that is clearly a reason to be able to if you like, force someone to pay their share in rebuilding the wall. So that should be relatively straightforward. Fell down, we should both join in. But what we're going to deal with here in this sugya is the fascinating question of whether we can assume that the person has actually paid what he's supposed to pay. Okay? In other words, if there is a counterclaim where someone comes along and says, I've done it, I've paid up. I know I was obligated to pay and I've paid. And the other one says, no, you haven't. And the question is, do we assume that he's paid or not? The Mishnah says, there's an assumption that he's paid his share until he brings a proof. Until he brings a proof that he hasn't paid. If one of them says, I've paid myself, I've done it myself, I've given my share, I've contributed my share, The assumption is that he would have paid. If he says he's paid, we assume he's done so, because everyone knows the rule. Everyone knows the rules, and he would have to prove that he hasn't. He have to bring Eidim that he hasn't paid, because the assumption would be that he would have paid what he was supposed to pay. Yeah. So right. Okay, let's just see Rashi actually on that part first. No, actually, no, one more line, sorry, in the Mishnah. Above 4 amos, you don't obligate him. Once it's above 4 amos, there's no way you can obligate him to pay, because above 4 amos, there's no requirement to build in terms of hezekria. Yeah? Once you got to the 4 amos height, beyond that, there's no expectation to pay. And therefore, beyond that, there's no reason why he should pay. Now, Rashi says like this: that's enough for hezekria to prevent him looking in and causing damages in that way. If one of them says to the other one, he's built it, I built it myself from my own money, because this other guy didn't want to help me, and he claims from him half the expenditure. He says, at the end of the day, he says he should have paid half and he didn't. And the other one says, Nosati chalki, I gave my portion. Neman, he's believed. He's believed to say that he contributed his portion. Until the one who's claiming brings Eidim, he brings witnesses. That he came from him and he never gave it. Since he has an obligation to help. That's very important words. And this law everyone knows about. It's crystal clear. The assumption is that he would never have built it himself. He would have gone to Beis Din and said, excuse me, I need to get 50% of the money from the other guy. So whenever you're dealing with claim and counterclaim, you've got to go with what is the you've got to think what is the most logical outcome, right? That's going to be your first thought. Whenever you're dealing with which is what we're dealing with here, what's called in halacha, it's a whole area of halacha called toyen v'nitan, right? Someone claims against someone else, he's the toyen, and the nitan is the one being claimed against, right? Classic machlokus, yeah? Someone says he paid, someone says he doesn't pay, whatever. You've got a first thing question you have to ask yourself in any sugya like this is, what is the most likely thing to have happened? Okay, the most likely thing to have happened here, in a case where you and I both have to pay 50%, is that I would not have gone and built the wall, right? Unless you paid, right? Because if there was a refusal on your part to pay, then I would have gone to Beis Din, and Beis Din would have just slapped the fine or the requirement to pay on you straight away, and that would have been the obvious thing to do, and therefore. It seems that we can assume that he contributed what he was supposed to contribute, but obviously that only applies to the height of the wall. That's a legal requirement for him to contribute to, which is the 4 amos height. Anything above, the guy wants to build higher, that's his problem, and he would not, and then he doesn't have to participate. Now the Mishnah carries on. What happens if? So the wall is higher than 4 amos. We're dealing with the scenario the wall is higher than 4 amos. And the guy next door, he builds another wall close by. So he didn't want to help contribute to the cost of the higher wall, the 8 amos high wall, for example. But then he built another wall opposite that wall, in order to utilize the 2 walls, let's say, right? So let's say build some, build a cover, a canopy or whatever. He wants to build a shaded area, a sukkah, whatever it is. Yeah. So he built a wall. This wall is in the border between the property. Obviously, let's say it's, for argument's sake, it's 8 amos high, and he built another wall, let's say 2 meters away in his own property that was the same height, in order to obviously use the 2 walls for some functional purpose. Then, even though he hasn't placed the roof yet, you can force him to pay the entire cost of, not the entire cost, his whole 50% of the whole wall, right? Of the height of the whole wall, right? Why? Because he's demonstrated that he's quite happy to have the wall that high, and he's using it for his own purposes. And in this case, in this case, the Mishnah says there's an assumption that he has not paid, however, until he brings a proof that he has paid. Because here, Here, this is not a case, a law which is well known. This is not something which is well known, and therefore, a person, it's quite likely that a person would not pay unless he's been pushed to do so in Beis Din, in Beis Din, and therefore, our default assumption is that this guy has not contributed what he was supposed to contribute to the higher height of the wall. All right, let's see Rashi. We're halfway through Rashi on the Mishnah. After one of them built it higher than 4 amos, much higher than 4 amos, and the other one didn't want to help him in that height, right? So this other guy built another wall in his own property opposite that one, to use it as a schach or whatever, to put a roof between the two. To build a roof, from one wall to another. Even though he hasn't actually placed that roof, he has got to pay his entire 50% portion of the cost of the whole wall. He has shown that he's quite happy with the height of the wall, hence he's using it for his own purposes. But in that case, there's an assumption that he has not contributed. That means in Bo Rishon v'Tovei Ladin, if one of the first one comes along, the guy comes and claims and takes him to Beis Din, after he has placed his wall close to the first wall, and he says to him, "Ten li chelkecha b'mashik basi, give me your portion in the height that you've in the height that I built it to." And the other guy says, "What do you mean? I paid you last week." He's not believed unless he has witnesses that he paid. Why? Because this judgment, this law is not, people don't know about this. This is this idea that you should automatically be obligated to pay in however high the wall is, if you've done something to demonstrate that you were happy with that height. That halacha is not something people know about. And until Beis Din actually turn around to him and say, "Listen, I'm afraid to say that you've demonstrated that you're quite happy with this wall, with the height, yeah, it's not likely he's going to pay up." And therefore, the default position is that he has not paid unless he can prove that he has. So you have the reverse scenario between the first half and the second half of the Mishnah in terms of claim and counterclaim. And that's going to be the primary focus of the Gemara, this idea of claim and counterclaim. And the key question is here, what is our default position? What is our default assumption? The truth is, you've always got to ask yourself that with any sugya, what is the default assumption? What is the default position? The default position in a straightforward scenario of a regular 4 amos high wall is that the guy is paid. The guy is paid, right? The guy is paid because it's an obligation to help. Everyone knows that's what you do. Everyone knows you pay 50-50 in terms of this party wall. So we don't look into each other's property. That's how it is. And if it was the case, as one of them wants to claim to the other that he didn't contribute, he wouldn't have built the wall. If someone has to do such an outrageous thing as refuse to contribute to that basic wall height of 4 amos, he would have taken him to Beis Din. He wouldn't have gone ahead and built the wall, and therefore it's assumed that he is paid. Whereas in the case where the wall is much higher, and the only reason he's being obligated to pay is because he's demonstrated through building another wall that he was happy with the height, and therefore the halacha now mandates him to pay for the whole height. This is something quite revolutionary. People are not aware of this. And therefore, if he says, "I paid already," we're going to say, excuse me, you're going to need Eidim, because otherwise we're going to assume you haven't paid. Why would you do so unless Beis Din obligate you? Is that clear? Is everyone happy with the Mishnah? Any questions?
Are we sort of expecting why do we require that the second wall he's built, i.e. his own wall, is of the same height as the dividing wall? Why is that a necessary criteria?
If the wall was not the same height, then we wouldn't have a proof that he was going to utilize the wall for his own ends. The factor which obligates him to contribute 50% of that very high wall, is the fact that he's shown that he's happy and he's benefiting from that wall.
So if he builds a wall, his own wall in his partition of only 4 amos,
then maybe
Then
exactly.
what is
Then
our
maybe
expectation?
that would not be sufficient to obligate him. Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. That might indeed be right. Yeah. I mean, this really borders, your question is very helpful, Jeremy, in the sense that it borders on the whole question here, which we kind of touched on in the previous Gemara about the notion of zeh nehena v'zeh lo choser. You know, if I benefit and you don't lose from me benefiting from you, you know, you want this wall anyway, right? You know, you built this 10-foot high wall with barbed wire at the top, clearly, whatever it is, for your own ends, right? So if I happen to benefit, you with me? Just because I'm now going to use it. I wake up one morning and I see this massive wall next to my property, and most people are going to go to the local authority and say, "Excuse me, you blocked my light," and everything else. That's a different sugya, whatever. Let's assume that's not the issue here. I wake up one morning and I say, "Hey, I didn't notice that wall before. That's really useful. I can use that for my sukkah." Yeah. So you know, if you think about this objectively, you could argue, you know, you wanted the wall anyway, so you're not losing out by me benefiting from your wall by sticking my schach on the top of the wall. It's a good, you know, it's a fair argument, right? Yeah. So this is really Tosfos' question. If you look at Tosfos Afal Pi, it's the third Tosfos from the end. Tosfos says, he says Afal Gav, even though the zeh nehena v'zeh lo choser, this one is benefiting and the other guy is not losing out. That means I'm benefiting from your wall and you're not losing out through my benefiting. Sometimes if I take benefit and you lose out, this is the classic internet bandwidth question. You know that. If you sit outside someone's house and you download, you know, a massive file using their internet, is that considered to be theft? It's a classic question that's been discussed many areas. But one of the key aspects to that question is this question of zeh nehena v'zeh lo choser. Are you losing out through, right, my actions, or am I just benefiting and you're not losing anything? You could argue you are automatically, especially if you're downloading that amount. But that's the question. So he says the halacha is, I can't recall exactly what the conclusion is in that whole debate, but the principle of zeh nehena v'zeh lo choser is your potter, is you're exempt. If I'm benefiting and you don't lose out from my benefiting from you, you're exempt. Nevertheless, given the goli die. So the question is, Tosfos' question is what? The question is, why here should I have to pay? So he says, nevertheless, given the goli die nichole bag bo chayav. Tosfos gives two answers. The first one is that since I've demonstrated that I'm happy with the height you raised the wall to, that's enough to obligate me, right? In fact, I've shown that I'm happy with the height, then I'm obligated. It's a sort of separate rule to say it doesn't follow the normal rules of zeh nehena v'zeh lo choser. Once I've demonstrated that I'm quite happy to have a wall that high, bang, it's a shared wall. We've got to both contribute. It seems to be, according to that answer of Tosfos, it's really just it's a special rule about party walls, something like that, right? Skip a few lines. He goes into a Gemara in Ketzad Regel about this in Bava Kama about zeh nehena v'zeh lo choser. Then he gives another answer, right? 2 lines from the end. Inami. Alternatively, can you see that? It's just 2 lines from the end of the Tosfos. Alternatively, he says, he is losing out, right? He caused him to raise it higher than 4 amos. If you roll this back in time, ultimately, he is losing through my presence, because the only reason he had to build the wall was because he wanted to be super careful about Hezekiah, about not being seen. You with me? You know, at the end of the day, it's only because of me that wall is there, right? I'm the one benefiting. I'm the one building the sukkah, yeah? But at the end of the day, the height of that wall was only because of me. It was because he was, you know, he wanted to have a super secure Hezekiah. He didn't want me seeing in any chance, so he built it 8 amos high. So therefore, it's not really, says Tosfos, zeh nehena v'zeh lo choser. It's not really this one benefiting, other than not losing. You see what Tosfos does here, right? He gives you 2 answers. It's very clever, right? The first one is a case-specific answer. This scenario of building walls is governed by the rule that if I show that I'm happy with whatever height you made it, then bang, my obligation to pay 50% kicks in. And the second answer of Tosfos is, forget about this case, look at the general rules of I benefit and you don't lose out from my benefit. And this does not fit that criteria, because at the end of the day, by definition, you losing out in the sense that you only built the wall because of me. You had to pay that money because you didn't want me seeing into your property. So, you understand? There's just like that's what's going on here with this Tosfos. Okay. Any other questions on the Mishnah?
He built the extra. We talk about a wall higher than 4 amas.
Yeah.
So up to 4 amas, everybody accepts that this was just a natural, the way of the world. You have to have some part of partition, which is sufficient to keep.
That's
if you want to be super secure and you don't want anybody to even climb onto the wall to look over, build it higher. But I don't want to have anything to do with it. If I choose to use the wall as my 4th wall for the sukkah, whatever, fine. But that doesn't mean I agree with it. Is that what you're saying?
No. But no. According to both explanations, the Mishnah says once you demonstrate that you're happy with the height, with this very high wall, you've got to pay. The question is why? Why can't you say I'm just benefiting because it's there? Yeah, and you don't lose from my benefiting. Why can't I just stick on? That's clear from the Mishnah. That you have to pay once you build your wall in your property to the same height. That's clear.
Right. What I'm saying is, if he's not building a second wall, he's using the high wall for his sukkah because it's there now. It doesn't mean he's happy with it. Doesn't mean he agrees with the height. The sukkah doesn't have to be 8 amas high.
Okay, so you're asking what is the criteria for defining how much you have to build or do something to show that you're happy with that height. That's not that's okay, that's a fair question. It's not entirely clear. It's not entirely clear, meaning the Mishnah gives you a case where he says you build another wall, and that's what shows you. Maybe it has to be something significant. Maybe your case would be an insignificant use, and that doesn't. Exactly. Okay, I hear what you're saying. That could be. That could be. So
why should insignificant use make a difference to Zen and Evazeh? Why is there a qualitative difference there?
No, on the contrary, the basic principle of Zen and Evazeh means it's problematic. It's problematic to obligate the guy on the other side of the wall, right? Shimon, who's just noticed Reuven building this high wall. It's problematic to obligate him to pay simply because he has found a benefit, right, from the other guy's wall. Because the general principle of Zen Ezochos, if I have benefit and you don't lose out through me having benefit, you don't care. Your wall doesn't suffer for my schach, yeah? You know what I mean? So generally, the default position should be, you shouldn't have to pay. Tosfos' problem is why. And then that gives a few solutions why it should be you should have to contribute, right? Jeremy's point is what level of demonstration do I have to give that I was happy with a height? And that's, okay, I accept that. It's not clear entirely, yeah, how much you have to do. But the Mishnah gives something that shows clearly that you have to be obligated, yeah. Okay, let me just.
But just to understand how it works with the general rule of המוציא מחברו עליו הראיה. The first half of the Mishnah there is no chidush. The Tovea always needs to prove his case. But I assume it's the chazaka only change. The chazaka is the proof in a sense for the second half.
So you're right. So this is very important. You're saying generally speaking, you say המוציא מחברו עליו הראיה. So someone comes along and says, "You owe me money." Right? And I say, no, I don't. And I say, no, I don't. So right? The problem is that here you have the concept of chazaka. There's assumptions which can change, there are assumptions which can change the balance of power. You with me? Like miadif, right? It's here, if I'm coming along to you and I'm saying you owe me money out of the blue, so then I can say, like, who says, like, prove it, right? Prove you owe me money, yeah? But if there's a wall here, okay, and the wall is a certain height, a very high wall, and I build a wall in my property, that's the same height, and you come along and say, you haven't paid me, and I say, I have paid you, right? So what you're asking, why can't you say, he's got to prove? The answer is because there's a chazaka, there's an assumption that people don't know this rule. And they will deny it until they're forced to pay in Beis Din. It's an interesting thing.
Yeah.
But there's also a difference, Shlomi, because here we're not dealing with a transaction of one person lending or giving money or whatever it is, a service to someone else. We're talking about the joint. This was a joint.
Yeah, but it's not
venture.
about the ownership, it's about the debt. Who owes me the hotzahot, the cost is very similar. It's
But
basically
if
about
it's
the
a
debt.
joint venture, the expectation is that there is no debt, if you see what I mean, that they both contributed equally. So there's no debt. One doesn't owe another. There's no presumption of debt to start off with, is there?
Yeah, and the other factor here which makes this case different, and Rabbeinu Yonah talks about this in the Shittim Kovetz, says that basically we are here, what has he done? He's planted the wall. Where is the wall built? Right? The wall is half in my property and half in yours. We established that before. Clearly, that's where the wall's going to be, right? The wall's going to be down the middle, yeah? That's where the wall is going to be. Now, therefore, effectively, I own half of this wall. So, but above 4 amos, right? Once up to 4 amos, clearly that's half, right? We got to share the cost, everything else goes without saying. But once you get above the 4 amos, we basically turn around to the guy who hasn't built the wall, the other guy, right? The one who didn't build it, and we say to him, look, you're in an advantageous position. You're in a good place here. You have a choice. If you want, you don't have to pay a penny more than the minimal height. Okay? But if so, don't use the wall. But if you want to use the wall, okay, then you're demonstrating that you want it. And if so, automatically your property acquires half the wall for you, right to the top. Yeah, because it's in your land. This is what you've done enough to show that it's effectively you want that height. It's yours. Your land owns it. Your chotzer then acquires it. It's a very interesting thing, and therefore you're obligated.
Yeah, interesting.
Yeah, that's what he says. I mean, but as I said, the main idea here is that this question of Toyin V'nitin. That's what we're going to look at now in the Gemara. Okay, so the Gemara says, Amar Reish Lakish says. And the Gemara here, let me explain the structure of the Gemara. It's a classic format of Gemara, where the Gemara brings a scenario seemingly unrelated to the Mishnah, but then we'll try and prove and resolve this case from our Mishnah, and you'll see how closely interrelated they are. Someone who fixes a time for his friend. That means to say, he gives him the money, he lends him money, and he says, I want you to pay me back in 3 months' time. And the other guy says, afterwards, he says to him, Paratich b'soich's money. I paid you back b'soich's money. What does that mean? I paid you back during the time of the loan. The loan was for 3 months. I came to you after a month and I said, here you go, I'm paying back early. That's what he says. That's what he said he did at the moment. So therefore he's saying, I don't owe you a penny, I paid you back a month into the loan. Eino Ne'eman, says Rish Lakish, he's not believed. Why? If only pay at the right time. If only people would pay loans when they're supposed to pay their debts, right? No way, you're not going to believe that. Someone came along and says, he comes along and says, when the guy asked for the money, he says, I paid you back. What do you mean? I paid you back a month into it. No. We assume he is telling an untruth, and therefore he will need to pay. Okay. And again, you could say the same thing. What do you mean? You're claiming that I owe you money, and I'm saying I don't owe you money. No. Here is different. Here, he's not saying that he is making a claim that he paid back at a stage in the loan where we would assume that that's not what people do. That's not normal behavior, and therefore we don't believe him. And they have to pay now. Abai and Rava disagree, and they both say Ovid inish to parabagozimne. People do pay back during the time of the loan. Zimnin de misramelu huzuzi. Sometimes they get a windfall and they gain some money. They get some money. And Omar, he says, top the next one, Ezel Ifrei, I'll pay him back so he doesn't drive me nuts, doesn't drive me bananas, right? So it happens. It's very common. He says the people sometimes they get a windfall, they know they owe money, and they say, I know that I've got 3 months to another 2 months to pay, but at the end of the day, at least I'll save him driving me mad. That is what Yeah, that is what that is what Abaye and Rava says. This is Machlokas Abaye and Rava and Reish Lakish. So let's see Rashi. Very short Rashi, the bottom of the previous Omid. Hakivez man lachaver b'milva shel vo, and a loan that he lends him money, and that's it. That's what Rashi says. That's what Rashi says. Yeah. Now here. Yeah. Okay. So what I want to do here is, First, let's go through the Gemara. Let's go through the Gemara because this is one piece. We'll see how it relates to our Mishnah, and then I'll go back and share with you some ideas about how this works and and the logic here behind this. So the Gemara, the Gemara says like this. Tana, look at our Mishnah. Our Mishnah says, what do we say in our Mishnah? There's an assumption that he's given the money until he brings a proof that he hasn't given it. That was in the first class of the Mishnah. When you've got a wall that's 4 amos high, we assume the guy's paid. And if he turns up later and says, excuse me, pay me, we assume that he's paid because everyone knows that's what you do, right? Hey Chidomi, says the Gemara, what's the case? If the scenario is that he says, I paid you off at the right time, okay? That means to say, I paid you off when you finished building the wall. So, if you think about this as similar to a loan, a debt, whatever, when is the zman? When is the time when the debt becomes, kicks in? When do I need to pay? Right? When you finish building the wall, right? That's when it becomes an obligation to pay. That would be the default assumption. So that if he says to him, I paid you back at that moment when you completed the wall, pshita. Right? It's obvious. Obviously, it's obvious that he's going to be assumed that he would have given the money, because this is a simple case, exactly as Shlomo said before, right? If it's the case that it's a simple case where someone says to someone else, "You owe me money," and the other one says, "No, I don't." Right? Then that's it. There's nothing else to say. There's nothing else to talk about. Obviously, you have to pay. Yeah. You look at Rashi. He spells out very clearly. Rashi says, when you finished the height of farmers pshita deneman. He's obviously believed. This is a claim of I owe you. You owe me money. And the other one says, no, you don't. I don't owe you anything. Where it's obvious that he's believed, because there's no reason not to believe him. Yeah. The case must be that he says, I paid you back while you were still building the wall, which is toch's money, within the time when you were still, the loan hadn't yet, was not a loan here. The debt hadn't become obligated to pay. I wasn't yet obligated to pay you for building that wall. It was whilst you were still constructing it. And therefore, it now makes sense what the Chiddush of the Mishnah is. The Chiddush of the Mishnah is that we do say, Alma, so we see Ovidinish Topori B'Soch's money, that people do pay back during the time, right? During the time that a loan effectively is lasting for, during the time of the loan, during the loan period, which here, and to translate that into our case, before he's built the full 4 amos. And the proof is, because when he comes along and says, excuse me, you owe me money, and I reply, what do you mean? I paid you back when you built the first row of bricks. Yeah. So he's believed, because we're assuming that must be the Chiddush of the Mishnah. And therefore that's a proof for Abaye and Rava and against Reish Lakish. Everyone clear about that? Yeah? Is everyone clear on this?
Sorry, can I ask 2 questions?
Yeah.
So one is, and it's been bugging me all evening, so apologies, which is, the last 2 Mishnayos have been teaching us that there is a chiddush about building walls between neighbors.
Yeah.
So why aren't we saying here that there is, because of, let's use Hezek Riyah as a reasoning, because of Hezek Riyah, he went ahead and he built it because he has a necessity to have this construction recreated. And therefore, whether he's paid or not is not, it's not the raya on whether he's paid him or not. He has to go ahead and build it whether he has the money.
Who has to go ahead?
The guy who wants the wall rebuilt. The guy who's in the action of getting the wall rebuilt.
Yeah, but the other one is obligated to pay his part, right?
Correct. But what we've set up, the Mishnah was saying is that, so let's say Reuven and Shimon. Reuven's building the wall, and Shimon now comes along. Reuven says to Shimon, "Pay up," and Shimon says, "I've already paid you the money."
Yeah.
Well, because the wall's in the process of being built. So what I'm saying is that why is there not a chiddush in this Mishnah that because of reasons like Hezek Re'iyah, Reuven is going to come along and build the wall even without having received any money from Shimon?
No, it's true. It may be that Reuven will go ahead and build his wall without receiving money from Shimon. But the Mishnah, the primary interest of the Mishnah is not that we both have to pay, right? Because that's already established in the previous Mishnah. The thrust of this Mishnah is a case of conflict, where conflict arises. That's really where, we're always looking for the problems, unfortunately, right? It's a classic. I mean, the Gemara and Mishnahs, they are a system of law. I can't remember often, in Daf Yomi, you have to keep reminding people of this again and again and again. The reason why we're dealing with complicated cases is because we're always looking for extremes. Why? Because that's how you establish the law. When you've established the extremes, everything else in the middle is simple. So in a case where everyone agrees, fine, it's obvious, right? Clearly, we both have to participate. We're dealing with conflict that can arise in a case of a wall that we are both obligated to build. The following conflict can arise, and the Mishnah tells you how to resolve it and what the default position is in terms of whether you assume he paid or hasn't paid. The Gemara's problem with that, which is what we're doing now, is that it's still, if it's the case, right, that I come to you and say, "Excuse me, you owe me money," and you say to me, "I don't owe you anything," okay, because I paid you off when I was supposed to. That look up Bava Metzia. You got Perokim full of that. It's obvious. Monali b'yodcha, you owe me money. I say to you, no, I don't owe you anything. Then clearly that's it, finished, end of story. So there must be something else here. And the Gemara is suggesting that the extra chiddush here in the Mishnah is the resolution of this question of Abai and Rav and Rish Lakish, right? And it's coming down on the side of Abai and Rav, right? That we can assume, that we can not assume, but it is a likely scenario. It's reasonable to say that people pay off during the time, before they're obligated to do so. Because that's the question, right? Is that a reasonable assumption to make? Does that help?
So then, it does. So then my last question is then, according to the Rish Lakish opinion of Paraticha B'Teich's money, why can't you just argue Migui?
What's your Migui? Well, let's explain. Let's take it slow. First, explain what Migui is. Forgive me. Go on, carry on.
So my understanding of Migui is that when you use a reason that isn't a typical reason to be used, it's not like the usual excuse of the dog ate my homework. This is something a little bit more exceptional.
Right.
So then Rish Lakish seems to be walking to a classic Migui. If you said, "I've already paid you early," and he says, "Alavai people should pay me on time, let alone pay me early," well, then that seems to be a classic Migui.
What is the Migui? The Migui is what? Migui means since, yeah? Since you could have argued what?
Since you could have argued either I had to pay you at the beginning or I should pay you at the end. I've paid you in the middle, and therefore I'm not mechuyev to you anymore.
Because I argued I would pay you in the end. Yeah, but the problem is, and the issue is, okay. So basically, I think the Migui needs a bit more refinement, because you've got to have something. No, I don't mean that. We got to. I'm being unfair because I'm coming with a prior knowledge of Tosfos here, who basically asks your question, right? But he develops the Migui a bit better. Okay, so we can do that line. I was only going to show you one line in Tosfos. It's on the previous Omer. We can do it now since you've raised it, Martin, because it's an excellent point. If you look on the previous Omer, the very, very bottom, Dibra Maskal Bob Ismanoi. Yeah, we're just going to literally do the first line of Tosfos. There's you got the Dibra Maskal from the Gemara, and he says venerally. He says, it seems to me, sheyesh eidim shechayav loy, that the case must be that there are witnesses that he's obligated, that he owes him the money, yeah, v'kova lo zman, and that he had fixed a time for the debt to be repaid by. The ilav hochi, if either of those factors were missing, the fact that there was witnesses to the loan and witnesses that the time was 3 months, the ilav hochi nehemne, we should believe him, that he paid him off within the time. But Migui, since he could have said, Diboy Omar, he could have said, Lo yovisa li klum, you didn't lend me anything, right? You didn't lend me anything at all. Or lo kovato li shum zman. or you didn't fix any time at all. Okay. We'll see if we, hopefully we'll get there. We'll see that when you didn't fix a time for the loan, the rules are very different, right? So if he could have argued, that's basically what you're asking, Martin, right? He could have argued all sorts of other things. He could have said things that were better, and he didn't. And he said this unusual situation of saying, well, I paid you back at this time, right? And therefore, and that would make him more believable. But in a case where there are Eidim that he paid, he can't make those arguments. And he can't make those arguments. But the reality is that, you know, you might still turn to me and say, well, he could have said, I paid you back at the right time. Yeah. And I didn't do so. I paid you back during the time. Right. That's what that was your sort of migu, right? He could have said, I paid you back on the day of the loan became, we're assuming now, obviously, that we are after the time of the loan, right? The Gemara will talk about this later on, but, you know, we're after the time of the loan. And a guy says, you paid me, and I could have said to you, I paid you back on the day I became chayav to pay. And instead, I said something, you know, less believable, whatever. It was a strange thing to say in the middle. The reason why that doesn't give you a greater degree of believability is because it fights against a chazaka. It's what we call migoy neged chazaka. You've got a migoy there. Since I could have said that I paid you back at the right time, so you should believe me when I said I paid you back at an unusual time, right? That's what you're arguing. Problem is, the chazaka, the people don't pay back earlier. There's an assumption. Chazak is very strong. Chazak means strong, right? It's a strong assumption, yeah, that people don't do these things, and therefore that destroys your migu. Okay, that destroys your migu. That's according to Reish Lakish, right? According to Reish Lakish, right? But is that okay? Is that clear? Yeah. So let's just come back to the Gemara here. What does the Gemara do with this issue? The Mishnah. We've got to find a chiddush in the Mishnah, because otherwise the Mishnah would seem the only way we can understand the Mishnah. The Gemara is arguing is that this is the scenario. The scenario is that he tried to pay him back early. He said he paid him while he was still building the wall, and that's why he's believed. Yeah, and that's why he's believed, because he said he's paying him back during the when the wall was being constructed. So you seem to prove, like Abai and Rava, that people do pay back during the construction, during the period of the debt. Does the Gemara know? Shani Hocha here is different. Here is different. Why? To call sofa v'sofa's money, because each row of bricks is the time of the when the debt becomes obligated, right? In other words, basically what the Gemara is saying is here you don't have, our Mishnah is not comparable to the case of Abai and Rava and Reish Lakish at all, right? It's not comparable at all, because you are in a situation where, in a normal debt case, right? I fixed 3 months. We fixed 3 months for the debt. By the time it gets to the end of the third month, you're going to have to pay, right? But this case doesn't work like that. The time where, technically speaking, you become obligated to pay up is actually after each row of bricks. Now, in practice, that may never happen, right? In practice, no one's going to go and put a row of bricks, right, and say to you, excuse me, can I have a fiver? And then the next row of bricks, can I have another fiver? And no one's going to do that. But the fact is that technically speaking, the time is there at every moment. So it's never toichsman, it's always la'achazman. Yeah. Now the Shittim HaKobetzis brings the Rashba, who says, if so, you know, we go back to the original problem. It's obvious. That's what we started with. Isn't that obvious? Then it's always la'achazman. It's obvious. So he says, no, that's what it's telling you. That's the chiddush of the Mishnah. The chiddush of the Mishnah is, right, that you know why we believe the guy when he says he's paid, that he's b'chezkas shenosan. Yeah. It is, the chiddush is that even if he says he paid whilst the wall was being constructed, yeah, where, at least we're going with Reish Lakish here, he wouldn't normally be believed. Here he is believed, because here, basically, there's no toich zman. Every time, every road that's built obligates me to pay my share, and therefore I can be believed to say that I paid at any stage, even during the construction. All right. Now, of course,
how does the Gemara establish that principle that he has to pay for every row? Where does that come from? Is that
So-
because the worker needs to be paid on a daily basis, or what?
It's interesting. Yeah, it's not. There's actually even a problem here with the whole girsa, right? Because the girsa we've got in the Gemara is like sofa v'sofa, which is like every row. There is another girsa which is the Rimigash, and he has the girsa called shah v'shah's manehu, every time, every moment. The time is every moment. Yeah. Because yeah, so he says. He basically says, I think that helps a little bit to understand what's going on. He says that he's basically chayav every step of the way. If I'm building a wall that's 50% mine, 50% yours, right? It's half in my property, half in yours. Technically speaking, you are mechuyev as much as me at every moment. It's not the same as a debt. We should both be building this together. Okay? And therefore, when he says, I paid you off, at every time that I was obligated to do so, he's believed because that's the time to pay. It's not the same as a debt. I think that's what we're really saying here. It's not the same as a regular. In a case of a loan, right? A loan, yeah. There are two clear periods. Yeah. There's the 3-month period where you've given me the loan for, and then there's the day, 3 months time, when I want that money, right? When I'm building a wall, which is really a joint enterprise between the two of us, there is no toich zmano. There is no within the time. We do it all the time. We should be, technically, I should be doing it with you. I don't know if that makes sense. Does that make sense? I mean, you have to remember also, Richie, that we're also, as always with these type of Gemaras, we're playing devil's advocate a bit in the sense that this is not a conclusive way of learning the Mishnah. We are simply trying to refute the claim that our Mishnah, proves Abai Verova's argument. That's all we're doing, right? We're saying that it doesn't. Reish Lakish can learn the Mishnah like this. Abai and Rava can learn the Mishnah like this. So the Mishnah is irrelevant to their question, right? That's what we're doing, right? It's a classic, it's a classic dichui in the Gemara, right? The way dichui works. It doesn't mean that we're saying this is the only way to learn the Mishnah. It's just that Abai and Rava will say, or Reish Lakish will say, I'm happy with the Mishnah this way. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And now, but the Gemara now goes into the reverse. Toshima, let's prove from the end of the Mishnah. We can bring a proof for this for their machlokas from the end of the Mishnah as well. The end of the Mishnah says b'chezka sheloi nosan. There's an assumption that he hasn't paid ad shiov yirah shenosan until he brings a proof that he has paid. So that was in the reverse case. Do you remember? In a case where he's gone higher than 4 amos, right? He's gone 8 amos high, whatever it is, and he builds the wall next to him, opposite. And then the chiddush is you have to now pay for the full height of the wall, but people don't know about this, and therefore, if the guy comes along and says you never paid me, then we believe him, and actually the guy's gonna. We assume he hasn't paid. Hey, Chidomi says, well, what's the case? Ilemo, if you're going to say to Amale Pratich Bizmani, you paid me off during the time, or no, at the right time. Sorry, at the right time. Amailo. So why is he not believed? Right? If he says to him that you paid me, I paid you off. Sorry, Pratich Bizmani. I paid you off Bizmani at the time, and at that time I became aware of how much I had to pay with the height of the wall. Right? Then Amaila, why should he not be believed? Why should he not be believed? Why should he not be believed that he paid off at that particular at the time when he finished the wall, right? So it must be. And what are we saying now? We're assuming again, if we just look at the Mishnah through the lens of paying off within the time or after the time, because we're going back to our default position that this is the same as a loan, right? We're going back to that now to try and bring a proof from the second half of the Mishnah. So we're going back to our assumption that this is a parallel to a loan case, yeah? If it's a parallel to a loan case, and the guy is saying, I paid you the full cost of the 8 amos high wall when I finished building my wall, that means the wall in my property, the one which parallels your wall, yeah? And then I knew, I know how much I have to pay. Then why should he not be believed? Elolav, it must be, and by the way, you come back here, this comes back to the point that Jeremy, you mentioned earlier about, what type of level of obligation, he's going to have to pay. Rashi seems to imply that once you build, if you build the wall, it seems to be to that height. Yeah, if you build it to the whatever height the wall goes, his wall, the parallel wall, that's his corresponding level of chiyuv in terms of his participation in the other guy's wall. So it might be a 10-foot high wall, and if he builds his parallel wall up to 8 foot, well, then that's the amount he has to pay in that wall. It does seem to be proportional, yeah, based on his level of chiyuv. Will go with that. So, but why should he not? Why should he not be believed? Says the Gemara, the case must be that he says to him, I paid you off b'toich money within the time. That means to say, within, whilst I was still constructing my wall and I hadn't finished it yet. So you see that people do not pay off during the time, right? But go zimne, that means during the time of the loan, right? People don't pay off during that time. People don't pay off. People do not normally pay during that time. So what we're doing really is, again, we're doing the same thing. We're saying, let's consider the Mishnah. If it's a case where everything is a shut deal, I've already built my wall, everything else, why on earth shouldn't I, why should it be the case that we assume he hasn't paid? Debts, they become obligated, and that's when people pay. So the Gemara says it must be that he hasn't, his argument is that I paid you during the time when I was still constructing my neighboring wall. And as a result, we can prove from the Mishnah, because it says he assume he hasn't paid. You assume he hasn't paid until he brings a proof. So we see people don't pay off during the time. It goes money. Says the Gemara, Shani Hocha. Here is different to Omar, because he says, Miyemar de mechayvu li Rabbanon. Who says the Rabbanon are going to obligate me? Right? Miyemar de mechayvu li Rabbanon. This really comes back to how we understood the Mishnah in the first place. It's why these Gemaras become a bit complicated, because it's gone a bit round the houses in the sense that, we learned the Mishnah with Rashi, and Rashi already basically told us that the logic in the second half, the Sefer of the Mishnah, yeah, was that people don't think they have to pay, yeah? But the Gemara tried to argue that might not be the reason of the Mishnah, and it might be to do with the fact that it was Toich Hazman, his argument not believed, because people don't usually pay back before they become obligated to pay back. The Gemara says, no, forget all of that. There's no proof for Reish Lakish and Abai. It's no proof for Reish Lakish that people don't. Right? Who says the Rabbanon are going to obligate me? And therefore, even if he says, I paid you off when I was supposed to, when I completed my wall next door, he's not believed. He's not believed, right? Because people do not pay this type of debt until Beis Din tell them to, effectively. Let's see Rashi on this. Toshma. So we missed out Rashi on the third wide line. It says to my page off within my time. Before you built up the 4 Arba Amos. Let's prove from the Sefer. It's assumed that he hasn't given it. If you're going to say, he says, I paid you off during my time, when I finished my wall, bizmani. Bizman means at the right time, at the finishing time. And I knew, and by then I knew how much I had to contribute to the cost of your wall, because only when I finish my wall do I know how much correspondingly I've got to contribute to your wall, the party wall. So we said, no, there's no proof, because he's always saying, who says the Rabbanon are going to obligate me? Even if I paid you off during my time, lo meheimon, he's not believed. Yeah, he's not believed, right? Lo meheimon is not believed. So the Gemara has basically concluded that you cannot prove Reish Lakish or Abai and Rava from our Mishnah. Says the Gemara, Rav Papa, Rav Vunabed of Yeshua, Avdik Abai v'Rava. Rav Papa and Rav Vunabed of Yeshua, they paskin like Abai and Rava. That what? That a person who says, I paid you off during the time of the loan is believed. Why? Because it's a reasonable claim to make. There's no chazaka against it, right? There's no chazaka against it, because people do that. That's what they do. Sometimes people do that. And therefore, he is believed. Rava Marbar Rav Ashi Ovad Reish Lakish. And Rava Marbar Rav Ashi, he paskin like Reish Lakish. He paskin like Reish Lakish. V'hilchasa Reish Lakish, says the Gemara. The halacha is like Reish Lakish. People do not pay back during the time frame of a loan, va'afilu miyasmi, and even from orphans. Okay, look at Rashi. Va'afilu miyasmi. Imeis halova b'soich zmanoi. If the borrower dies during the time of the loan, go v'chova minei yasomim. Okay, he can claim his debt from the orphans below shvua without making an oath. Generally, if one claims from yasomim, if the borrower has died and you're trying to claim from his estate, and we're talking here even about adults. Tosfos says, yeah, even if they're adults, the halacha is generally you would have to make an oath. You'd have to make an oath that and here you don't need to. We are not concerned that maybe he's paid off already. We're not concerned because people do not pay off. Even though the master taught, you come to claim from your somim, you can only claim with an oath, you have to make a shvua. The chazaka is stronger. There is a chazaka that people do not pay off during the time of the debt. They don't do it. That's just not the way they behave. And because that's not the way they behave, therefore that very strong chazaka defeats any presumption, and it defeats the normal ne'emonos, the believability that you have. If someone says moneli biyodcha, right? This is our starting point. You know, exactly as Shlomo said before. The normal time is you say owe me money, and I say I don't owe you anything, right? I don't owe you anything, right? You have nothing in mind. You've got to prove it. But here, because I said that I paid you back during the time of the loan, that is a very, very big mistake. Because once I say that, there's a very strong chazaka that kicks in that says people don't do that, and therefore you're not believed. And even if the guy is dead, so you're claiming from the yasomim, generally you have to make a shvua to claim that you're owed the money. Here you don't have to make a shvua because people don't pay back during the time of the debt. Now there's a little, just to finish off, there's a little Tosfos on the previous Omid which helps us understand the logic of Reish Lakish. If you look at we may have to recap this next time, but let's see it very briefly. It's just a very one-line Tosfos. Omeri, the Re says, Dafka kuvei zman, only specifically if he fixes a time. Aval b'stam halvor lo choshev leitoch shloshim toch zmanoi. With a loan, a stam halvor, okay, with a loan that is a loan period is generally assumed to be 30 days. It's what we call a stam halvor. If I lend you money and I don't specify how long, the time period is assumed to be 30 days. That's the assumption. We're not talking about that type of loan here. With that type of loan, yeah, it's not considered to be toch zmano. There is no toch zmano here. The whole question here is only with a loan that's a specific time frame, then we say that people don't pay back during the time of the loan, okay? So we're out of time now, so I'm going to do this in Yitz Hashem next time. But hopefully we'll begin the shir next time with a Ketzos HaChoshen, and the Ketzos will help us understand the real, to get to really the bottom of where Reish Lakish is coming from and why it is that it's such a strong assumption, you with me, yeah, that people never pay back a debt early in a case where they've been given 3 months. Because, you're thinking, I'm sure, like a Bayan Rava, it's very logical. I get a windfall of cash, right? And I think, what's the first thing I'm going to do? Let me clear the debt so the guy doesn't drive me mad. So there must be a very strong argument, a logic against that. And the halachas like Reish Lakish. You open a Shulchan Aruch, the halachas like Reish Lakish. The people that we assume people don't pay back during the time. So it's very important to understand. Mitz Hashem, next time we will continue that. Any questions before we go?
Sorry, that last Tosfos, so you're saying that with the Stam Halvor, which is Toch Shloshim Yom, you do believe him?
Yes, that's exactly what we're saying. This idea of not having that you're not believed to say you paid back early does not apply to a Stam Halvor.
Why not?
That's what we're going to see. That's
And
what I'm pointing out is the difference between a Stam Halvor and a Halvor of a fixed loan period where you specify the period. That difference is going to explain to us really help us understand the logic of Reish Lakish. Okay, I know I'm leaving it on a bit of a cliffhanger, but listen, that's sometimes we've got to do that. So that's how it is. We're out of time. It's been a long shir. So anyway, I hope that was all clear, and Mitz Hashem will continue next time.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Pleasure. Have a good evening.
Yeah.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Pleasure, pleasure. Good evening.
I think it's interesting about the interest payments,
Interest.
because if it was a loan with interest, then
Yeah.
you'd say actually you would want to pay it back early to save yourself interest. But because there's no ribas involved,
That's
you
very
can,
interesting.
there's a logical thing to say actually,
yeah,
why would
yeah.
I pay the loan back early?
That's very interesting. I didn't think of that. I didn't think of that. Yeah, whether how the interest payments. I mean, the Gemara is obviously assuming there's no. We're talking between two
Yeah.
Jews. There's going to be no interest. Yeah, we know heteriska and everything else, but that's not the norm. That's not the default. Yeah, that's very interesting. Yeah, yeah. We'll see. Maybe bring that up next time. We'll see if it comes into it. Yeah, yeah, yeah. That's right. Okay.
So there's shul in the morning.
Is there shul in the morning? We're going to have a meeting about it now, but I see absolutely no reason why not. But we'll see. But who knows? We'll
Apparently
see.
it's okay according to the
What?
BBC. According to the BBC, it hasn't been.
Powers of
restricted.
worship is no change. So as long as we're careful, shul is normal. We'll have to say. Well, I'll see. Okay.
Okay, go.
Hopefully. Okay. Have a good evening.
Yeah. Good night.
Good night.